Good morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you are. Welcome to day 2 of the IMO's Maritime Week, organized by the Embassy of the Republic of Indonesia in London and the One Ocean Hub. This seminar will highlight the problem posed by climate change, an issue at the core of the interface between shipping activity and sustainable development. Our panel will provide an explanation of the effects of climate change on the ocean, coastlines, and coastal communities that have been disproportionately impacted by increasing carbon dioxide and other greenhouse gases from human activities. Therefore, the seminar provides an opportunity to discuss innovation which can support the maritime transport sustainably. I am your moderator, Alana Lancaster. I'm an environmental and energy lawyer specializing in the marine environment. And I'm based at the Faculty of Law, University of the West Indies, Cave Hill campus in Barbados. Before we begin, let's do some housekeeping. All sessions are set to auto-record, and we hope to share these via YouTube after the event. The images, audio, and any slides or video shared by any panelists will be included. If you do not wish to be recorded, please let the organizers know or let the host know at the start. We will ensure not to include this in the YouTube materials. You may use the chat function to introduce yourself, but questions should be posed only using the question and answer function. When you are posing a question, please indicate the name of the panel member you are directing your question to at the start of the question, so I am able to indicate to the specific panelist. While the panel will endeavor to answer all questions in the session, if we run out of time, participants may contact panelists directly after the event, either via the One Ocean Hub website, by email, or by repeating their question in the post-event survey. I am sure the panelists, if they are so inclined, will indicate if you may contact them further. Please allow me to introduce the panelists. Pierre-Jean, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Good morning, afternoon, or evening, everyone. So my name is Pierre-Jean Bordahandy. I'm associate professor at the School of Law here at the University of the South Pacific, and everyone refers to me as PJ. It's easier. And so I am what we call a dry shipping lawyer. So I usually look at bills of lading and transport and carriage. And I've been involved in the IMO negotiations on the reduction of greenhouse emission from ships. Thanks.
Thank you, PJ. Kofi, would you like to introduce yourself?
Yeah, briefly. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone. My name is Benjamin Kofi Nyako with the University of Cape Coast Department of Geography and Regional Planning. I'm a fiscal geographer by training, and my interest is also in climate change, coastal dynamics, and stream flow. So you're welcome. Thank you.
Thank you, Kofi. Hendra, may you introduce yourself?
Yes, thank you, Alana. My name is Hendra Siri. I'm from Senior Policy Analyst at the Indonesian Ministry of Marine Affairs and Fisheries. During the 2018 and 2019, I was tasked as an interim executive director at CTI, Coral Triangle Initiative on Coral Reef Fisheries and Food Security Regional Secretariat This is a multilateral partnership of 6 countries in ASEAN and Pacific. So you're welcome, Alana. Thank you.
And thank you. Well, we certainly have a very eminent panel of speakers. So to begin, I'd like to ask, PJ to commence his presentation. And after that, we'll be followed by Kofi. So PJ.
Thank you very much, Alana. So I'll start to share my screen. That's it. And hopefully you can all see.
Yes, we're seeing
the proper way, or is it better this way?
You need to.
That's better?
Much better.
All right. So thank you very much, Alana. I also would like to thank the Indonesian Embassy for organizing this event. It's a great and fantastic opportunity for us, a researcher working within the One Ocean Hub, to present our field of expertise and our field of research. So very much appreciated. So now a bit of explanation. My presentation will deal with climate change and shipping. As I've already mentioned, I've been involved in the IMO greenhouse gas emission reduction negotiation who've taken place for a number of years now under the mandate given to the IMO by the UNFCCC. Now, I just want to say a bit of a word about this logo here of the Faculty of Law of Universitas Brawijaya. This presentation is actually based on a lecture, 2 hours lecture that I've delivered for the University of Brawijaya. So I thought it would be opportune to mention that to my colleagues, Indonesian colleagues. Now, I've had to, obviously, as you imagine, cut down the presentation from 2 hours to 10 minutes. So I hope I'm not going to rush you through too much. But in substance, this is what I'm going to talk about. I'm going to give a quick introduction about the greenhouse gas emission from ships, and just to give you some figures and an idea of the magnitude of the problem in relation to shipping only. Then I'll also talk about the economic challenges that reduction of greenhouse gas implies. Then I'll mention the technical or non-legal issues that are discussed at the IMO. You have to understand that those negotiations on the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions from ships, the IMO is a very technical organization. It's an international organization that deals with shipping, and it deals with a lot of the technical part of shipping regulations. So here, as I'm a lawyer by trade and a law academic, I've mainly focused on legal issues, which are not obviously apparent during the negotiations. So, but I also wanted to talk briefly about the non-legal issues, because they have a bearing on the legal issues. So first I'll talk about the non-legal issues, then I'll talk about the procedural issues in relation to these IMO negotiations, and then I'll finish with the legal issues and a quick conclusion if I have the time. So this is where it all starts, basically. I'm sure you've seen this graph. For anyone that has been involved in greenhouse gas emission reduction, this is basically, I don't know if you can see where my pointer is on the screen, but basically the first line there, the darkest one, is if we continue the same rate of greenhouse gas emissions, so that would be business as usual. And this is what we have to curb. And the sooner we curb that, the better for everyone. I am not going to enter into the technicalities here. I am a lawyer, I'm not a meteorologist, I'm not a climatologist. So it is important for me to flag already that I have to take this science for granted, and I have to take the IPCC reports basically on the face value. And I often say that to my colleague and my students, because it is important to recognize that this is a field that you don't have competence entirely to assess what is said. Now, the important line is the business as usual. The first possibility to decrease greenhouse gas emission would be if we, with the current fleet, we try to impose energy efficiency measures, but we need to go much further than that if we want to have a chance to really decrease greenhouse gas emissions to a minimum of the IMO. And so these emissions should really occur by 2050 to have a chance to curb the impact on climate. And even with all these ambitious measures at the IMO, we will still be far, there will still be a gap to reach the 1.5 minimum or maximum degree increase. So this is really to set up the background. Now, what you have to understand about the shipping industry in relation to greenhouse gas emission, the shipping industry is user of a very bad quality fuel because it's very cheap. It's called bunker fuel. The bunker fuel is high in sulfur. There's been a lot of regulations already to try to reduce the sulfur content in bunker fuel. So these regulations have been adopted in the past and are now in force. The shipping industry also produce a lot of nitrogen oxides, particulate matters, volatile organic compounds, and ozone depleting substances. However, having said this, the shipping industry is a very efficient and very economical way to carry cargo per ton carried. Basically, the shipping industry is the most efficient transport industry. It's also important to note that 70 to 80% of the world trade is done by ship. So international ocean carriage also contributes for around 3% of greenhouse gas emissions. And this, again, I have no control over all those figures. This is what the main literature has established. However, what is important to consider here is that if shipping was a state, this level of emission, which is only 3%, would put shipping, if it was a state, in 6th position in terms of emitters. So this is not an negligible emission level. What is important to understand also is that there is an intense competition on some routes between shipping companies and very little on others, and particularly in the South Pacific, for instance, where we've got very little competition. Now, shipping also is the key to globalization. So in our liberal market economy, really, shipping is the main tool for this liberal market economy. So this was a really quick background. The other thing that I wanted to talk about is the economical backdrop of this IMO greenhouse gas reduction, because we are in a market economy, and in the market economy we talk about eco-transition or decarbonization or climate transition. So the important word here is transition. So what we're trying to mean here is that the market should be transitioning towards a transport that is decarbonized or that is more eco-friendly. And so when you hear the word transition, that means that it refers to an incremental process or progressive transition. And that is, again, if the market does it. So that corresponds to basically the implicit capitalist doctrine of the invisible hand of Smith. Adam Smith, not to name it, in his main book, The Wealth of Nations. He's very often referred to as basically the main ideology, market economy ideology. Now, so that puts the equation of greenhouse gas emission reduction in a context of market self-regulation, progressive transition. We need to have the confidence in the market. There shouldn't be too much state intervention, and that's a pure liberal and neoliberal ideology. But we are also in the context of a lack of global governance, except for international organizations, such as the IMO, but they don't have a mandatory governance power. That's what I'm referring to here. So basically, in this context here, where we've got all this, there is only 3 ways for the market to curb emission. The first one is with market-based measures through emission tax, levy, and so on. The bad news is that none of this is currently implemented. There is very few market-based measures to curb emission on land transport. None, absolutely none for shipping. In fact, the fuel used in shipping is tax-free. And the IMO hasn't started to really address the consideration of any market-based measure. The second possibility for curbing emission on using a market basically is if we have technological innovation, if there are product or processes that can substitute fossil fuel to move shipping, basically. And the third possibility is the directing role of the stock exchange. So coming back to the technological innovations, we are not there yet. We've made substantial progress, but there is no readily available, cheaply readily available technological innovation that we can put tomorrow in ships for them to move. And the last one, directing role of the stock exchange. We have seen some timid movement towards decarbonizations, but really the stock exchange is still massively invested in carbon-rich industry. So let's move quickly to the technical issues discussed at the IMO, and you will find some of the things that I've already mentioned. So the first one is alternative fuels. So essentially deals with hydrogen on one hand, ammonium on the other hand, wind, solar, and so on. None of this is really entirely ready. Some source of energy such as hydrogen would be a very interesting source because it only produces water, but we would have to talk about the green hydrogen. So the one that the problem with hydrogen is how you obtain hydrogen, how you create hydrogen, and usually it's very energy demanding to create hydrogen, except in countries that have geothermy, for instance, such as Indonesia or some Pacific states that could produce perfectly green hydrogen. Ammonium seems to be pushed by some industry, notably the agrochemical industry. The problem with ammonium is that it's highly corrosive, so it could be used apparently in some diesel engine, currently in place diesel engine on ships, but it's extremely corrosive and there will be all sorts of upgrade necessary. Solar and wind generated, kite, and all sorts of technical innovations are not really readily available. Other technical issues there was a lot of talk at the IMO about speed limitations. The slower you go, the less you use, and that is really exponential, basically increasing or decreasing. However, the IMO chose to apparently abandoned the speed limitation and has preferred the goal-based measures. I don't have time to really explain all the complexity attached to the goal-based measures, but this is really one of the technical issues that has been discussed at the IMO. The IMO also is considering very closely, and it has already adopted, and those rules are already in force in relation to energy efficiency design index and energy efficiency operational indicators and ship energy efficiency management plan. So there is a lot of regulation already that have been adopted by the IMO in relation to the design of ships, and so that they are as efficient as possible, so that they use the less amount of fossil fuel possible. It's in obviously everyone's interest. Now, if we move quickly to the procedural issues for that surrounds these negotiations about greenhouse gas, and we are, as you will see, slowly drifting towards legal issues. So these are procedural issues, but semi or quasi-legal issues. First of all, the main issues that I've found as an observer and as a participant on Pacific delegations participating or involved in these IMO negotiations is that Procedural rules at the IMO requires that every delegation pay for their own cost. The direct consequence of this is that developing countries, SIDS and LDCs, most of them do not have the funds to participate to those negotiations. So that raises a clear direct issue of international democracy, because a lot of those countries, developing countries, SIDS and LDCs are not able to go to London for a week or 2 weeks at a time and negotiate. And that's a substantial issue. The second thing, I don't want to get bogged too much in the details, but the IMO has also a fiction, is also using a fiction. For every international organizations, the members are state. They are international organizations, so they're created by states and members are state. IMO has a sort of a bit of a subtle difference to that, is in the sense that it is considered that the members of the IMO are not states, but they are flags. Now, this is a bit of a fiction, but it's a fiction that has its importance. Why? Because I'm not going to get too much into the details, but basically, in some cases, some countries have their flag run by a private registry. And so that you can see why, in some instances, it's very important to establish a distinction between a state and a flag. Working arrangement has been a recurrent issue also, because the speed at which those negotiations are taking place basically are crucial in reaching out a consensus and a decision and solid measures to curb emissions. The problem is that at this stage, progress at the IMO have been really, really slow, and partly this is due to the working arrangement where there is no proper subcommittee of the Marine Environment Protection Committee. On the other hand, if we had a real subcommittee, that could in fact also slow the process. So at the moment we are stuck with an international working group plus sorry, don't have much time to dwell too much on this, but this is one of the key problems. The last remuneration to procedure is the impact assessment procedure that has been designed by the IMO. The idea of that procedure is that, and I have to be really clear about what this procedure is. It is not your usual impact assessment procedure. What is assessed here is not the impact on the environment. No. What is assessed here is the impact of the IMO measures aiming to curb emissions on the economy of states. All right, so you have to really switch here. So the impact assessment is the economic impact of the IMO measures on state. The problem, and this is a key problem and a semi-legal problem here, is that according to the procedure that the IMO finally has agreed on, every state have to prove the impact, the economical impact that they are suffering. And as you can imagine, this is a major challenge for developing countries, SIDS and LDCs. Now, without having too much time to go into too much details, I'm going to go through 5 more central legal issues that we are facing. And again, I insist those legal issues are not discussed on every day on the floor at the IMO during the negotiations. In fact, they are never discussed. They are like the elephant in the room, because they're probably too difficult to address. The first one is the issue of incompatibility between the requirement of science-based measures, which is a requirement that IMO apparently has, and the principle of precaution. So I hope you're all familiar with the principle of precaution. Basically, those two principles, science-based measure and principle of precautions, are completely opposite. So on the one hand, science-based measure says that you can only adopt the measures if it is scientifically proven that these measures is justified for such and such reason. On the other hand, the principle of precaution is saying that even if you do not have any scientific basis, if there is a doubt, you should refrain from undertaking an activity. So you can clearly see the opposition and the clash between those two. To this opposition or this difficulty, I would add the third one, to this first legal issue, is that everyone at the IMO talks about, we have at the IMO the principle of science-based measures. After checking the convention, the IMO convention, and the text of the IMO, there is no such science-based measure requirement or principle legally part of the IMO legal framework. It doesn't exist. It is something that comes from the World Trade Organization, from the GATT. It is also something that is found in fisheries, for instance. You will find that in the reflagging, the compliance agreement, in the UNFSA, in the CCRF, the Code of Conduct for Responsible Fisheries. But at the IMO, this is not a legal principle as such. Switching quickly to the second issue, there is another incompatibility between two principles, which is the principle of CBDRC, the principle of common but differentiated responsibility and respective capabilities, and the principle of no more favorable treatment. Again, those principles are completely opposed. On the one hand, you have a principle, the CBDRC, that says countries should be treatment to countries should be differentiated according to their responsibility and how much they are responsible to greenhouse gas emission. So this is coming from the UNFCCC. On the other hand, you have no more favorable treatment that requires that every country should be treated the same. And again, IMO very often requires that the no more favorable treatment is a principle, a core principle of the IMO. It is not. It is not part of the IMO convention. It is not part of the legal framework of the IMO. It is, again, something that has been adopted as a practice. And you will find that incidentally in some part of MARPOL, but not as an overarching legal principle. The third legal issue that I wanted to mention for memory is the issue of the application of polluters pays principle. It is a principle, it is basically the legal emanation of the negative externalities that have to be taken into consideration. This hasn't been discussed so far at the IMO in relation to greenhouse gas emission, and it's quite strange because it is a principle that has been widely adopted by the IMO in relation to other type of pollution. I'm thinking about oil pollutions from cargo or from bunker, for instance. The fourth issue is the issue of market-based measures. This is also, again, I've discussed that earlier on, but it is a semi-legal issue. The IMO hasn't begun to address this. There will be also the issue about enforcement, whether it's going to be through a port state or flag state. This also hasn't been discussed. So as you can see, 5 legal issues and not small ones haven't really been addressed because they seem to be really too difficult. That's really in a nutshell, and I'm sorry about the speed at which I've had to go through to give you an overall presentation about what's happening at the IMO. So thank you very much, everyone. Terima kasih. Thank you, Thomas, as we say in Vanuatu, and Vina Vakalevu, as they say in Fiji. Over to you, Alana.
Thank you so much, PJ. That was certainly insightful presentation that raised for me a lot of technical as well as legal issues, which I'm sure we can get to in the Q&A segment. I'd next like to ask Kofi to give us his presentation. Kofi.
Okay. Let's see. I want to take the notes off. Do you see the notes too? Can you hear me?
No. Yes, we can hear you, and we don't see the notes. If you could put it on presentation format. So
yeah, it's in the presentation format. Okay, so let's go on. I hope this is okay. Okay. Yeah. Thank you very much for inviting me. Well, as I said, my name is Kofi from Ghana, and my presentation is to look at the impact of climate change on the ocean, the coastline, and coastal communities, looking at the Ghanaian perspective. Well, Okay, let's see. My presentation outline, first I'll give you just an overview of the Ghana coastal area, look at climate change and its impact, and try to understand the fishing behavior within the Ghanaian coastal waters. And with the coastal communities, we'll try to also understand where risks will grow and intervention will be needed. Then we have some perspectives and the way forward. Well, Ghana as a country has a vast coastal and marine space, and most of this coastal marine space is used for fishing and transport. But in terms of fishing, we have three main subsectors: the industrial, the semi-industrial, and the artisanal. And in Ghana, well, the government, through policy, has earmarked some areas within the 12 nautical miles from the shoreline for artisanal fishing and not for any other activity. And in Ghana, artisanal fishing is facing some high level of pressures. Well, key amongst them is climate change, or the use of unapproved gears, overexploitation, fish aggregating devices, and pollution, and so many others. Well, we've talked a lot about climate change, and it's like climate change, as we know, we are looking at the significant change in the mean state of the climate, and if this persists for quite a long time. So through models, we've come out to accept the fact that given a period of time, the climate will definitely change, and this is likely to affect so many things, including the sea surface temperature. We're looking at the salinity, the sea surface currents, and also the sea surface heights. So, but moving forward, we've identified that at least climate change has some level of impact. One important is erosion, flooding, and also it affects fishing resources. Why do we mention erosion? Well, in the first place, we know that the Ghanaian government has set up a definition for the fishing zone. And why do we define the fishing zone? The fishing zone is, at least for the artisanal fishers, is to help us conserve fish stocks and also protect some level of ecosystem, and also give the community some level of security so that they can earn income from whatever activities they do. And the other point is that since we have artisanal fishermen, they will not go beyond the fishing zone to crash with or have some level of collision with vessels, and also prevent some level of sectorial conflict between the artisanal fishermen and the industrial fishers. So, but in defining the fishing zone, it's becoming problematic. Why is it so? In the sense that at least true level of erosion or true high level of erosion, as we could see, the point of reference for defining the fishing zone is changing. For instance, which work done by some colleagues have stipulated that have predicted that the current shoreline, which we use to define the fishing, the inshore fishing zone, will be changing given some level of years based on climate change. So in this case, now how do we define the inshore or the fishing zone for the artisanal fishermen? So that becomes one important thing, that through climate change, at least erosion, it's quite intense. or will be intense. And that is also going to affect the shoreline definition in which we use to define the fishing zones. The other point that we've also realized is that the fishing stock also is being affected by the sea surface temperature. So as the temperature changes, the level of stock also will definitely change, because you could see from the diagram or from the figure that I've shown that the fish catch at least peaks normally when the sea surface temperature is at the lowest. Okay, so from 1992 to present, we've also seen that there's always a decline in the landings of sardinellas. So in this situation, what are some of the causes that has led to such a decline? Is it because we have enough, or we have excess efforts that have been put in place in order to harvest the fish, or as a result of climate change? So in this situation, as the climate changes, then fish species would definitely have to adapt, okay, or else it will lead to their extinctions. And also in terms of looking at the currents that drive the distribution of these fishes, especially the pelagic and some benthic species, it's also being affected by the climate change. Moving forward, yes, we need to understand the behavior also of the fishing. And in doing that, the density of vessels is also being mapped. The trajectory, the point at which they traveled, it's also being mapped. And overlaying the fishing vessels map over some potential fishing zone, we'll be able to understand how people behave in relation to the fishing activities within the Ghanaian waters. Because as we know, Ghana, the density of vessels per unit area is huge. Within the coastline, which we have more than 12,000 small artisanal fishermen or canoes used for fishing. And with their unapproved gears, this has affected the landing of fishes within the coast or within the ports. The other point from the Ghanaian perspective, the other point is, yes, climate change also has a very huge effect on various communities. A study conducted also along some coastline of Ghana to determine where interventions will be needed. And it's over a period of time, I realized that yes, the same areas along the coastline of Ghana will need some high level of intervention, because risk will grow, and that will lead to migration, and that will also lead to loss of livelihood. So the migration effect of people on the destination would definitely be so enormous. So the government needs to understand, or communities need to understand where the risk will be, and some kind of interventions that would be put in place. So from this background, what are some of the perspectives that we need to take into consideration? Well, we're saying that in Ghana, we know the oceanographic conditions are changing, and also we're having the declining in reproductive pattern and distribution of fish population. How do we combat some of these things? Now, from the biogeographical point of view, it's likely that as the sea surface temperature, the conditions are changing within the ocean, then species are likely to move towards the high altitudes. So in this situation, it would jeopardize the food security and livelihoods of people living within our coastline. And the other point is that, yes, from the national point of view, well, the fisher folks, the artisanal fishermen who are very poor, they have very, very little influence on the intention of the nation, whether they would have to reduce or how they can even reduce greenhouse gases. So in this situation, it's always determined from the capital or the policy makers. The other perspective is that, at least as a country, we need to also put measures in place to reform our fishing activities vis-a-vis climate change, okay? Because Ghana is one of the high-risk areas where we have dwindling fishing resources. So in this situation, we need to restock or find a way of restocking the fish population and try to prevent or to stop trawlers from stealing our small pelagics, okay, that has been reserved for the artisanal sectors, because most of these vessels are, well, foreigners who have just come into the country and registered them within the Ghanaian flag. So what is the way forward? Well, as a country and as a group, well, we need to develop a suite of tools that would help to integrate the ecosystem-based marine spatial planning, okay? Then also have some level of pluralistic legal framework that is based on inclusive and participatory process, because we don't want the the top-down approach, but it should be a bottom-up or probably a dialogue within the community. Then also the government, we need to enforce the rules, the policies, so that all the fishery or those fishing within our waters would comply with it. Then the other point is that since from the beginning, I did mention that Ghana fishing activity occurs mostly, majority of the fish is landed within the 3 months, especially when the sea surface temperature is very low. After the third month, the fisher folks becomes idle. So in this situation, whatever they've saved for the next 9 months have to be used, and they move back to the line of poverty. So there's also the need to explore alternative livelihoods to support at least the well-being of these small scale fisher communities. So based on this, at least this is to give you some level of perspective from Ghana as to what we can do, climate change and water. So thank you. I'm done.
Thank you, Kofi. Thank you, Kofi. That was certainly a very practical perspective between the impacts of climate change and on coastal fisheries in Ghana. I will swiftly move to Hendra for your presentation. And I'll remind our audience that you can pose your questions in the Q&A box, and we'll get to that after Hendra's presentation. Thank you.
Thank you, Alana. First of all, I would like to express my special thanks to the Embassy of Republic of Indonesia in London and One Ocean Hub to invite me to be part of this important seminar. So my presentation will be slightly different with PJ and also the coffee. As requested by the organizer, we will highlight our effort on climate change adaptation, including vulnerability assessment and local early plan in the Coral Triangle. Yeah, allow me to give a snapshot of the Coral Triangle Initiative on coral reef fisheries and food security, or known as CTICFF. This is a multilateral partnership, as I mentioned before, of 6 countries, namely Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, Solomon Islands, and Timor-Leste. Is working together to sustain extraordinary marine and coastal resources by addressing crucial issues such as food security, climate change, and marine biodiversity. The CTICFF was formally launched by our leaders in 2009 as they declare Coral Triangle Initiative Leaders Declaration on Coral Reef Fisheries and Food Security at Leaders Summit in Manado, now is a home of Regional Secretariat of CTICFF in North Sulawesi. It was on May 15, 2009. So it's already 11 years already. So it marked the historic beginning of series new commitments by the 6 countries, or CT6, to an unprecedented cooperative effort to safeguard the world's richest marine resources and ensure that the income, livelihood, and the food security for millions who depends on these resources. All 6 leaders also recognized the urgency of a strong climate change focus to this important initiative. Through the leader declaration, the presidents and the prime minister of Indonesia, Malaysia, Papua New Guinea, Philippines, Solomon Islands, and Timor-Leste formally adopted one of the most comprehensive and specific plan for the food security and ocean conservation. The 10 years regional CTI plan of action, or we call the RPOA, set a time-bound step to address growing threat to the region, coral reefs, fisheries, mangrove, threatened species, and other marine and coastal living resources. We are currently working on renewal our RPOA. Just for your information that CTICFF has been registered to the Secretary General of the United Nations in accordance to the Article 102 of the Charter of the United Nations on 1st of November 2017, which means that we are an international organization. So let me inform you where the Coral Triangle actually is. If you can see, this is a red line. This looks like triangle. We can see that. Is a geographic terms that refer roughly a triangular area of the tropical marine waters of the eastern part of Indonesia here, the eastern part of Indonesia, and also to the Philippines, eastern part of Malaysia, Sabah here, down to the Timor-Leste, up to Papua New Guinea, and also to the Solomon Island, which is representing custodian of the Coral Triangle area. So the 6th country is representing that. It is demarcated by the scientific boundaries, which occur the highest diversity of coral species and reef fish in the world, and is located to confluence Western Pacific and Indian Ocean. So you can see the 2 main oceans here, Pacific here, and also the Indian Ocean. The Coral Triangle has about 4.4 million hectares reef, which home more than 500 corals and 3,000 fish species. We represent about 76% of the world coral reef species and 1/3 of total world coral reef area. Coral Triangle region also has a 4.6 million hectares mangrove. Malaysia and Indonesia share the biggest contribution for the mangrove. The region also nurtures 6 of 7, the world's 7 marine turtle species, and more than 80 charismatic and threatened species. We can find most of the world's seagrass species in the Coral Triangle region as well. So it is important, its importance is undisputable. It supports a fuel economy of more than 130 million people living in the coastal who rely directly on marine habitats. The Coral Triangle region provides spawning nursery ground for tuna, which is support multi-billion tuna industry. It also contributes to an estimate 2.3 billion each year toward the economies of the region. Its marine resources also provide to a growing nature-based tourism industry, valued at over $12 billion annually. So To narrow down the climate change impact, so I would like to highlight in the leader declaration the mention specifically about the climate change. So many coastal communities in Coral Triangle are already experiencing the impact of climate change. The climate change issues in Coral Triangle, including, as you can see in the screen, the health and safety concern of several storm and coastal inundation, damage in coastal infrastructure from flooding, changing of fish species. Coffee mentioned about this, the changing condition will be also changing behavior of the fish, and habitat degradation. This is including coral bleaching, which we experience in the sea surface temperature. So prior to COP15 or UNFCCC, it was in 2009 when Copenhagen, we had the Copenhagen HOP at the time. Our minister get together in Gizo prior to the COP15 in Solomon Island, launched the joint communique on climate change. This is the only specific joint communique that produced by our Council of Ministers to highlight the importance of climate change and its harmful impacts, and also need to address the having adaptation effort. Our minister also support the inclusion of marine elements issues to the negotiation text of the UNFCCC. So if you can track down that since 2009, we promote including the blue carbon, but the healthy ocean is the main agenda for our joint communique. And we have also developed 2 early action plans, which is called regional and also local wide earlier plan. The work of CTI has been guided by the Regional Plan of Action, or what we call this RPOA, which have been implemented into 5 goals. So I can see that first, we have a priority seascape are designated and effectively managed. An ecosystem approach to fisheries management and other marine resources is fully applied. Marine protected areas are established and effectively managed. Climate change adaptation measures are achieved, and the status of 13 species is improving. So this goal aligned with the Sustainable Goal 2, 5, 3, 13, 14, and 17, and resonated the goals of UN Decade of Ocean for Sustainable Development. So the goal of climate change is interpreted into targets. You can see that the green one is the region-wide early action plan, and the yellow one is the network national center of excellence. So these 2 targets have several actions to achieve the goals I've described by this slide. CTI CFF member countries has implemented the LEAP, what we call this local earlier plan, LEAP, and undertook the vulnerability assessment. So the community-based adaptations appears to be the preferred approach in the most countries. Our LEAP guide consists of vulnerability assessment tools for wide range of vulnerability assessment tools. We have some tools that we adopted. For example, in each country, we led the country to adopt by their local conditions. So in such as like in Philippines, and the University of Philippines Marine Science Institute, or UPMSEI, has developed a simple vulnerability assessment for Philippines to assess the potential climate impacts on coastal integrity, fisheries, and other components of coastal marine environment. So the choice of vulnerability assessment tools will depends on the purpose of the assessment. For Indonesia, for example, we adopted the local need, and we developed some guideline with some modification of LEAP. At the time, we combined such as like the vulnerability assessment assessed by the USID. I would like to share that, having the vulnerability assessment, our adaptation effort to mitigate the impacts of reduced disaster reductions, and especially for the eroded coast. When the coffee mentioned about in Ghana, we addressed that for the Moody coastal. We use the community approach and how to build the eroded coastal, and then to regain back the sediment that already lost. So this is, for example, one of example that I want to share. That I know that we have plenty of example, but this is in north coast of Java. Why this is important? Because this is link of the economic mode of transportation. So it's linked the eastern part of Indonesia and also the western part of Indonesia. So together with the EcoSafe Consortium and Wetland International, we apply the initiative, what we call is building with nature. Instead of building on nature, we have a building with nature. This approach is comprehensive engineering approach. We try to adapt what is engineering works and to seek the enhance the natural ecological process to achieve efficient and sustainable hydraulic infrastructure design. It strives for flexible integration, land and water in land using interaction material present in nature. So in this photo, you can see this, we use some woods, but we have also some bamboos. We try to many the material that available, but not to make it resources will be scarcity. So we apply, for example, we apply to the mangrove roots. You can see that mangrove has like very special roots. They can keep the sediment. So we adoption the mangrove root. We build the semi-permeable dams. So it means that when the high tide, the water with accumulated with sediment will bring all the sediment and waters to behind the dams. And then when the low tide, the water will be released to the ocean again, but the sediment will be captured behind the dams. So this is a kind of like the community to build that. Of course, we using our assistant to the community to make sure that they buy a combination of, we call Indonesia hybrid engineering. Why this is hybrid engineering? Because this is using the engineering principle to to measure where the how can we maximize the sediment captures by putting the permeable dams. So it used to be in the bamboo here, it used to be a house and also the fish pond before the eroded. So we would like to put it back, the coastal that already lost, and then by having bamboo in here, after 3 years, the bamboo will be a kind of fertilizer, the natural fertilizer for the mangrove, and then make sure that the mangrove will be stable by the time of the bamboo will not optimally functional for capture the sediment. By the time the mangrove is ready, can play the role for that. So I would like to conclude my presentation by highlighting that we have been working and will continue to address the vulnerability of our coastal and small island, especially due to the adverse impact of the climate change. And we welcome support and collaboration of climate change adaptation, such as like from the Scratch University. Thank you. Terima kasih. Maraming salamat. Thank you, Thomas. Thank you, obrigado. This is a kind of greeting. Thank you from 6 countries, including the English. Thank you very much. Thank you, Alana. Back to you, Alana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Hendra. And indeed for introducing us to the Coral Triangle Initiative and its contribution to not only climate change, but coastal security as well as food security. It's also interesting to see the linkages between Indonesia and our one ocean hub countries, Ghana, the Solomon Islands, and indeed I see many linkages between the Caribbean and my own country, Guyana, especially when you're speaking about the coastal defenses. Okay, so after these 3 presentations, we do have some questions posed in the Q&A segment. I encourage those of you who might have questions to also pose them as we enter this segment. I noticed some of the questions have been answered, so I will ask the ones that have not been answered, and then maybe as time goes, we'll then get to the other questions. So the first question is directed to Kofi, and Kofi, has the oceanic changes affected food security and nutrition in Ghana?
Well, we will not say in Ghana per se, but within the fisher communities. I'll say to some extent, the artisanal fishermen normally get their resources within the first, or I'll say the 3 months where they can land so much. After that, they have nothing. So in this situation, whatever amount they get, whatever money they get, they use to buy food stock, but it won't last. So in this situation, they have to apportion. Then the other point is that, yes, the food they'll be eating may not be so much nutritious in the sense that the protein aspects may not be so much complemented. So, well, and a lot of research needs to be done in this aspect in order to come out clearly whether the nutrition aspect has been compromised. But in terms of food security, yes, I know definitely some would definitely, after the fishing season, they move to different areas in order to get some resources to sustain the family. Yeah, I don't know if.
Thank you. I'll go to a question asked by PJ. He's answered it, but for those of you who may not see the answer, so because I find it a very interesting question. So the question is, what kind of inspection is done at the port for IMO 2020 compliance? Is all based on BDN or sounding samples? Has there been discussion to make sure that bunker fuel with 3.5% sulfur is not supplied in the or black market? How will we expect all the registries step and enforce IMO 2020 to their ships, including those of flags of convenience? This was posed by Dini. Yeah, so PJ, that's quite a lot of questions there. Interesting questions.
Yes. Look, the sulfur content issue is an issue that I'm not very familiar with, for the simple reason that this has already been part of package that was passed by the IMO prior to the greenhouse gas emission negotiations. So I'm not too familiar with this topic, but when it comes to enforcement, basically that I'm more familiar because it's basic UNCLOS stuff. So here, when it comes to enforcement, you don't have too many options. Either you have the flag state or the port state or coastal state, depending on where exactly the foreign ship is located. Now, when it comes to and you know the story, when the flag state is not doing its job, then it's up to the port state or the coastal state to do theirs. Now, I think there has been a couple of decisions already in relation to the sulfur content, and there's been some ship owners already fined for having non-compliance fuel. But I'm afraid I haven't really researched and investigated the area much more than that. But the issue about enforcement is one that is going to also be present for the greenhouse gas issue, because when it comes to the port state jurisdictions or the coastal state jurisdictions, we're not too sure whether the jurisdictions for enforcement of the greenhouse gas compliance will be limited to the port state or the coastal state will be extended. So namely, whether a coastal state will be able to go all the way up to the end of its territorial sea to check about the emissions. And so clearly that question arises also in relation to sulfur content. So this is areas and questions that I'm not entirely sure of. That's why I can only respond by a way of general answer. Thank you.
Thank you, PJ. I have another question for Kofi. What do you think is the most suitable approach between adaptation and mitigation in the Ghana perspective?
Well, in terms of adaptation, what the government is trying to do now is to encourage people to go into aquaculture instead of they going to sea. So they are promoting the use of aquaculture. And the other point is some of the measures also adapted for, especially when during the off season, it's also to go into pineapple cultivation. Now, some kind of crop cultivation that's being sent to or supplied to various factories for juice making and other stuff. So in this case, at least for adaptation to climate change, these are some of the measures. Well, to mitigate, especially with the efforts that is being put in place, is to reduce the number of vessels or ships within the waters, because we have over 12,000 and we don't have as much big water. So what the government is trying to do is now to relicense some of these vessels, and anybody caught using illegal method, it's being punished and the license is revoked. No, so. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Kofi. Yes, our audience, you can pose questions in the Q&A. In the meantime, I'd like to ask Hendra, about the Coral Triangle Initiative. Do you think as a regional collaboration, this places the member states in a stronger position to combat the challenges posed by climate change, excuse me, by climate change, and as you mentioned, the food security and coastal protection? Yeah, that's a question from my perspective, yes.
Yes, thank you, Alana. So to respond to your questions regarding the position, I'm sure that we have a strongest position to deal with what you mentioned, that to address the climate change impact. Our member countries, such as like Indonesia and Philippines, this is a two biggest archipelagic state, and we have also the the countries or member countries in Solomon, which is we have a three seascape area that which should be important: Sulu Sulawesi, Bismarck Solomon Sea, as well as Lesser Sunda seascape. To address this, why we need to address this, because this is a kind of the area that, especially for the tuna, that's a very highly economic value of tuna. Always, once of their life should be part of that coral triangle area. So you name it, like bluefin tuna or yellowfin tuna, that would be like it. So this area should be, to make sure that we address the area will be healthy. This is that's our leaders' message in the beginning, how to make sure that we have the healthy ocean, especially healthy coral triangle, to just make sure that healthy food security for the world, because this area is, again, this is part of the economic value. And I think so I have addressed some questions regarding the hybrid engineering technique. May I answer, Alana? Or
yes, I was about to
okay.
ask you. So do you want me?
Right.
I'll read the question and then you'll respond.
No, I can read from the screen.
Okay,
so,
go ahead.
Yeah. So how the technique? So the technique, especially, this is what we call this semi-permeable structures. So means that it can be water can be passed these structures. So we put it the structures in the area that we do it by techniques where the optimum spot will be to capture that. So in the example that I mentioned, so we put it into the what do you call this, into the area that is already lost. So we put it into the structures will be like a kind of submerged in not the submerged. I mean, it's like when the high tide, the water can pass the structures. The water will brings the high tide will bring the waters together with the accumulated sediment. And sediment will be later on, because the gravity will be settled behind the structures. So when the low tide, water will be released to the ocean again, and the sediment will be settled. So by the time, and every day, if like twice a day of high tide, it can be like the process will be like that, and then the periodically the sediment will be settled. Once it is like 30 centimeters, normally we try to replant the mangrove there. So the mangrove will be grow there, and then sediment will be absorbed again, and by the time it will be settled and can be guarded the loss of mangrove. So once the mangrove will be there, we make sure that it can be like a fishing ground as well as nursery ground for the fisheries. So by the time we make sure that the food security will be there, because we make sure the continuation of the life cycle, especially for the fisheries. So I hope I can answer my the question to myself. Thank you, Alana.
Okay, so I can take it from here, Alana.
Oh, okay, we'll,
yeah,
yes, go ahead, Kofi, and then we'll wrap up. Yes,
all right. Okay, maybe taking it from the bottom. Yes, we have, though we have to, in terms of measuring the effectiveness of the adaptation measures, we use some proxies, at least based on not the amount of money he has in his bank account, because saving culture is not too good in Ghana, but at least the resources that he's been able to buy within the shortest possible time. So some of them who have gone into this pineapple farming now have, apart from the canoes, the original canoes that they have extra 1 or 2 canoes that could go into the waters too. So, and also they are able to send their wards to school, and also pay a lot of premium for other activities and put up decent homes. So this is to show how effective the adaptation measures have been. So the other point is, yes, in terms of climate change, well, some may battle between climate change and climate variability, but there are some fish species that have vanished within the Ghanaian waters. Okay, though we've not been able to pinpoint directly to changes in the conditions of the ocean, or probably to changes in temperature, but definitely as temperature changes, it has a likely effect on the other activities within the ocean. But I would just go in and say that, yes, I agree with you that at least overfishing, it's one important factor. And the use of unapproved gears. And also, well, we'll say the Chinese trawling, doing pair trawling, catching almost everything and discarding what they don't need. It's one of the important factors. Yeah, but at least there are studies going on to look at climate change and also fish stock depletion. Yeah. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Kofi, for answering what will be our final question. Well, this has certainly been a rich hour and a half of discussion. And I'd like to thank our organizers, panelists, as well as our audience for attending day 2 of the IMO Maritime Week series hosted by the Embassy of Indonesia in London and the One Ocean Hub. Thank you and have a great morning, afternoon, or evening, wherever you may be.
Thank you, Alana.
Thank you,
Thank you again
Alana.
thank you, the KBRI London, as well as One Ocean Hub. Thank you very much. Thank you, PJ, and also Kofi, to share this very
Thank you, Andre.
informative.
Thank you, Kofi.